Okay, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our next presentation. Our next session is What is Grief? This presentation is being done with or presented by Vicki Jay. She currently serves as the Chief Executive Officer for the National Alliance for Grieving Children. Her career in hospice and death care spans 25 years, championing services for individuals and families before and after life-altering events. Career highlights include founder and executive director of Rays of Hope Children's Grief Center in Midland, Texas, and interim director for Hospice of Midland. Vicki is recognized for her role in children's advocacy and her public speaking and community education strengths. She has received many awards and recognitions for her work with nonprofits and in the field of bereavement, including the National Jefferson Award for Community Service, a prestigious national recognition honoring community and public volunteerism in America. Recipients are ordinary people who do extraordinary things without expectation of recognition. She is a graduate of Texas Tech University and currently resides in Lubbock, Texas. So thank you so much for joining us, Vicki, and we look forward to hearing your presentation.
Thank you, Danielle. I'm honored to be here today. As Danielle mentioned, I am with the National Alliance for Children's Grief. And so our focus is supporting anyone who supports children and teens who've experienced a death. Megan Lopez, our National Program Director, and I are honored to be with you today to bring this topic to you. So first, we just want to recognize how hard this topic is, and if this topic involves a personal story, how difficult your world must be. But you're here because someone did the unimaginable and caused harm to another individual, a baby. And so, you know, our hearts are with you. And for those that are supporting, the professionals that are on the call that are supporting those families who've had this experience. You know, no matter the outcome of that incident, it is fraught with emotions and fractured relationships. So we're going to spend a little time today talking about some of that. So first of all, let's start by recognizing that changes and losses that are experienced as a result of a single incident can be overwhelming. When a child's life is taken, obviously, that's a huge loss. And we mourn that death. And that alone can be so overwhelming. But in addition, there are other factors considered. What happens if there's not a death? If the incident didn't result in a death? So when someone dies, we mourn that loss. Our culture, our traditions, our family, our community teaches us, supports us, provides opportunities for us to mourn that loss. And we take comfort in that. And the rituals that are associated with the passing, we're offered resources and support. We turn to those around us for support. A death is really an event that is recognized by all as a cause to grieve. But what happens if there is no closure? When a child may still be alive, but has a changed life. And this too is a reason to mourn, and yet it's often not acknowledged, or maybe it's just that we don't know how to acknowledge. We fail in that area. When the child is alive and has survived the incident, we mourn the loss of what could have been or would have been. And maybe the most significant is the loss of a future for the child, the dreams, the hopes, the aspirations that we hold for our youngest. And this is true whether the child dies or now has a life full of challenges. And while this is really significant, it's often unrecognized as an experience that causes grief. In our role as supporters, the professionals, it's important that we help elevate this. We raise awareness that this is a loss. It does cause grief of all kinds. Ambiguous loss is learning to live with unresolved grief. So examples of that might be supporting someone with Alzheimer's, They experience unresolved grief as the person is still alive, but the person they knew is slowly just disappearing. Or maybe immigrants who leave their homeland, even if it's by choice, they often mourn the previous life. They mourn the experiences they had and wish that life was different. Parents who give birth to children with special needs mourn for the life of the child that they had dreamed of and hoped for. And couples who are unable to conceive, they grieve the child they aren't able to bring into the world. And all those are just examples of what we call ambiguous loss. And ambiguous loss is one of the things that I think right now across our nation, we are experiencing all kinds of losses, but we have traditionally caused kind of equated death equal grief. And we haven't got out of that parameter very often. And I think it's, especially in this topic, it's really up to us to help expand the parameter of that equation, that it's not just death. It can be a lot of other things that we grieve. People who are experiencing ambiguous losses are filled with conflicting thoughts and feelings. Perhaps death might be a resolution to the current situation, but it's hard to think about wishing for or hoping that that is the end outcome. To sit in that chair and think like that causes so much turmoil within. And again, it's up to us as professionals to support that. And then it's really helpful for those who have experienced this kind of incident to know that that's a normal and natural feeling, to see two sides of a lot of coins, to look at both sides of the issue. When someone has been, I don't know, mysteriously missing for a long time, it's hard to know what to hope for. And the person who's in that chair goes back and forth. Well, sometimes we just, the waiting is the hard part, the not understanding, the being in limbo. So as we support each other through these kind of horrific incidences, we have to understand that it's not just death, that it's more than that, and engaging in conversations that really help bring it all to the forefront. So, I know that a lot of times our thoughts and feelings bring guilt. So when we think about somebody or something or an incident or an action, and we think about the negative side, it causes us to carry guilt inside. So in a minute, we're going to talk about what do we do about all this that is stirred up in us. What I want you to understand is no matter what the outcome of that incident is, there is no doubt that the whole aftermath is fraught with grief of all kinds. So I keep talking about grief, and Danielle said we're going to say, what is grief? So let's talk about defining what is grief. And if I had the ability to communicate with you right now, no matter what professional hat or caregiving or family hat you wore, each of us would define grief in a different way, because it's based on our own experiences, our age, our relationships, just so many factors play into that. And there's probably not one word. If you were to, Google grief, maybe you'd get a simple definition, but it in no way would be comprehensive to each of us in describing what we actually feel. So when we think about the different layers in grief, and what I define as grief in one instance, myself would be different from myself in another instance or another time in my life. So I want to kind of generalize and say, let's think about grief in this way. And I've worked a lot with kids, and kids have actually been the ones who've helped me understand that this is a pretty good definition of grief. And the way that they have helped me understand is that it is an internal response. It's what's on the inside that is caused by an external event. So no matter what I'm feeling at what time, related to what, and no matter what the event was, big event, a little event, it doesn't matter what it is. If it If it causes me those emotions, then it's grief. So, it's hard one of the things we don't do in the grief world is compare types of loss or grief, because your story, your grief is yours. And you can't imagine anybody feels the same way you do at the same time. So even though two people experience the same loss, they may handle it very differently. When you look through a child's eyes, which is such a blessing, we learn so much by looking through kids' eyes. A loss of a pet can be huge to them, while we kind of poo-poo it as if that's just part of life and we're going to go on. To them at that moment in time, it is huge. So I think it's important for us to understand that it doesn't matter what the external event is. What we really are concerned about is the internal reaction. So what is my internal reaction? And that's full of all kinds of emotions and feelings and reactions to it. And how I handle those is very different than you or someone you're supporting or someone else in the family or involved in the incident. What I realize, though, is what is important is the way that we handle the internal. The more you deny, don't access, don't give permission, and internalize and keep it internal, the more damage it does. So our goal in the role of supporting grievers or in being a griever ourselves is to be able to get that inside stuff out. And it really doesn't matter, what method you use, as long as it's healthy. It's recognizing that you do have inside stuff and that it does need to come out. The problem in this kind of situation is we don't always allow for that. There's not a model on how to do that and how to talk about this kind of loss in our society, in our culture. And so we have to work really hard at it. Our culture is pretty competent at grief when there's a specific closure and a recognized loss, but not so much afterwards, otherwise. So the circumstances that are related to this kind of loss or change or this kind of incident add so much complexity to the topic. Many times, even those that are close to the situation, close to you personally, are hesitant to talk. And I think that that's often because they don't know how to talk or what to say. I think in many ways, when I think about the work I do with children, we want to protect children, so therefore we don't engage them in conversations, when in reality, maybe protecting them isn't our ultimate goal. We may use that as an excuse, but our real uncomfortableness is that we don't know how to talk to children. And I can equate that to this situation. This is hard. This is difficult. How do you bring it up? How do you talk about it? There are so many fingers pointing in multiple directions. There's so many unknowns that are involved. How do you bring it up and talk about it? So what I say is we each have a role in that. As a supporter or caregiver, a professional, it's up to us to create opportunities and ways to engage others that are affected by the situation. And unfortunately, some of the responsibility is on those that are directly affected to not be afraid to bring it up or to allow people into the conversation, as difficult as it may be. We have to engage and support each other. And that may be just sitting beside each other, but it's acknowledging that this has occurred and there's an aftermath of it. There's something that comes afterwards. And just that acknowledgement that this has occurred without worrying about the details is such a gift. So when we talk about facilitating with kids, and when I think about the questions we ask each other, we're often so guilty of saying who did what, where, when, and how. We want to know all the specifics. And when you're dealing with our emotions and it doesn't really matter what the specifics are. What matters is how those specifics are affecting you as a person. Not what, but how. How is that affecting you? Where is that landing in the person who's directly involved? And how can we help them with that has landed. So, I think if we, in conversations, no matter who it's with, is get away from the details, get away from the specifics, and just concentrate on the emotions, the feelings, the concerns that we have internally, is a gift that we give to all. I also want to just say that when a family or a support system, they all experience the same death or the devastating event, but it doesn't necessarily equate to everyone being on the same page at the same time. In fact, it's that often causes extra stress. So when I think about this parent who has experienced just a horrific incident, and they're trying to support children or other family members, and they don't have the wherewithal to get up off the couch that day, and they're trying to support another family member or person involved who's angry at the world, and then another one who's closed off. There's no wonder there is such a disconnect. It is hard when you're not all on the same page at the same time. But the reality is you shouldn't be, and you can't be. So we just have to find ways to bridge that. And sometimes that's the outsiders that are coming in to help bridge that gap. It's also just an understanding and a communication issue. I am here now and I feel this now but I understand you're in a different place. That's really hard conversations to have, but it's very important that we acknowledge all the different places and levels of intensity that anyone directly involved can be at any one time. Members of the support system struggle to recognize that. People are at different phases at different times, and we need to maybe do a better job of that, and then leave space for that as we help navigate the losses and changes that they have all felt. One of the unfortunate outcomes of this kind of loss is broken relationships. What was known and solid before may now be questionable. Your faith in yourself, your faith in others, your trust has been broken. And, our life is very dependent upon relationships. And so one of the things we need to do is, as supporters, is reach out and encourage those that are directly involved to find that circle of support, to identify those that are safe and that are supportive, and reestablish maybe new relationships, and just connect those that are affected, to know that they are in a circle of support. There are people who do care, who do have resources, who do have insight and are helpful. As a person whose circle has been broken and destroyed, or is questioned at this time, it's important that we acknowledge that and work really hard to do our own inner work on what does it mean to me and what am I willing to risk and not risk. And that sometimes really takes some outside support in helping you understand what is needed to move forward in either with previous relationships or building, having the courage to go forth and build new relationships. Relationships are part of the loss spectrum when we talk about this type of situation, death. The other thing is it's okay as a person in that situation to miss and want the relationship you had before. It's natural for us to yearn for the world we had as we knew it before it went upside down. And so just giving ourselves permission to say, it's okay that I miss what I had. It's okay that I miss that person, even though I'm really angry with that person or I'm really questioning that person. I still miss that person. And it's that acknowledgement that is really a helpful healing tool as we move forward. And again, as supporters, we need to help in that process. So one of the most important takeaways is whether as a griever, we need to give ourselves permission to grieve in our own way, in our own time, using our own process. As supporters, we need to give others permission to grieve in there is no, we know this, but there is no right or wrong way to grieve. There is no timeline. There is no model. There is no quick answers. It's messy and it's hard, but when we come out on, through the process, we become stronger and reach a new level of reconciliation and moving forward. That's very important. So we live in a world where people want to think they know how someone should grieve or react or do or act upon a lot of things, including grief. And so we have to be willing to kind of be that ambassador for ourselves or for others and say, no, this is my story, this is their story, and they're going to do it in the way they need to do it. And you do it in the way you need to do it. So there are a lot of best practices for those that you can offer to those you're supporting or that you can offer to yourself. And number one, first and foremost, is taking care of yourself. That means very basically having all your physical basic needs met. It means having sleep, food. As basic as that sounds, that's one of the hardest things when you're overwhelmed with this kind of situation. So meeting those basic needs, putting structure to whatever you can be structured, starting with a sleep schedule, go to bed. Even if you don't sleep, lay in bed, try to make yourself and try to get a sleep schedule that it becomes routine. Choose good company, surround yourself with support. Help those you're supporting find others to support them. Bring in people to really strengthen that circle of support. Allow yourself time, lots of time. And as we know about grief, you don't check it done. There's not a timeline, and there's certainly not an end date to it. It is a continual process. And just when you think you've got it under control, something else will pop up. And we can't prevent that from happening. But what we can do is know that it's going to happen and acknowledge that it's normal that it happens. And just absorb it as it comes and know that it may come again. And it's that knowledge that gives us strength to be able to move forward and keep going, is that we don't let things knock us down. We anticipate and acknowledge and move on. The other thing is, and I mentioned this before, but don't try to meet the expectations of others. And certainly don't be in the role of giving expectations to others. This is their story, or this is your story. Make sure that those expectations of what is needed is driven by the person who is in need. And then just be gentle with yourself, or be gentle with each other. Give permission to each other to just be gentle. The bar has changed. Right now, we're kind of in a survival mode, and we just need to be patient and gentle, primarily with ourselves. The other thing that seems so simple, and we teach this to kids, but I think it is so true for all of us, is move. Physically move. And as easy it is to sit, it's really hard sometimes to move. But if you just get up and move every single day in some new way and cause your body to be energized and fueled with that movement, it's amazing what good will come from that. And then, the things that people associate with grief are really about emotions. That's usually when you say grief, everybody kind of connects that to emotions. And what we know about emotions, it's a roller coaster. I can't tell you what to anticipate. I can't tell you what to do with them. But what I can tell you is that it's going to be a roller coaster. You're going to go up and down and around and around. And, just knowing that that's okay. And sometimes you'll have with kids, we talk about double dip feelings, where you have two feelings at the same time that are kind of in contrast with each other, wanting something to stop and wanting something to go on, wanting something to be over and not wanting it to be over. There's, wanting to eat, but not feeling like you can eat. There's all kinds of examples we can talk about our emotions, and it doesn't matter what they are. What matters is that we recognize them. We know that they're going to come and go and be up and down, and that we find an outlet for them. We find something to do with those emotions rather than just internalize them. So part of that is, part of the grief process also is you can't, it doesn't happen overnight. You can't just charge forward in the world. So set small goals for yourself. Say, tomorrow, if I just do this, then I will have accomplished something, and that's good enough for tomorrow. And the next day, I'll try one more step and I'll do one more thing. Those small goals give us that sense of accomplishment and moving forward. And part of the grief process is continually moving forward. You're going to take some back steps, but if the momentum continues to go, 2 steps forward and 1 step back, then we're making good progress. Just some side notes, I think. One of the things that is associated with grief is that you become a little forgetful. It's hard to hold things in your head. And so making lists will make you feel more competent, more capable, more in charge of the world. And so making lists sometimes prove to be a very, very helpful thing. I also would say, they say don't make big decisions following a major loss or change. And what I would say is just be cautious. Sometimes you're forced to make decisions, but just use a lot of caution and explore all the options and bounce your thinking off as many people as you can that you trust to give, accurate feedback that you can trust. And just as especially if there are major changes or decisions, make sure that you have done your due diligence and don't act on impulse. You can't avoid decision making. It's part of the role of each of us. It's from the youngest to the oldest. It is part of our everyday lives. So just making sure that you follow through with as much support as you can garner. And then the big issue is taking care of your inner needs and whatever that means to you. And what it means for me is different than what it means to you. It's different for each of us. So it means maybe for some spirituality, maybe it means I need a creative outlet. Maybe it means I need a service outlet. When I do for others, it makes me feel better. Service often adds meaning and purpose. What you really need to do is find a purpose to live every day, a meaning to every day. So when you get up, find something that feeds your soul. Find something that is just for you, regardless of how it lands on others, that is important to you, that will take you to a place of comfort, a place that provides and meets your inner needs. It's so hard because we don't do it enough in our everyday life. We're too busy and life moves too fast. And I think that's even, exaggerated when we have this kind of situation come up. But so is the need. The need is exaggerated, where you need more than you ever had before. You need that inner soul. And maybe that's with a companion, and maybe it's individual, but find something that feeds you. It's so important. And the last and most important thing is to seek help. You're not in this alone. There are so many resources out there. Sometimes it's hard to go looking for them. So if you're in need of resources, then ask others to help you find them. Many, many times after death, people will say, what can I do? What can I do? What can I do? And we're all thinking about the physical, bringing the food, making sure that basic needs are taken care of. But there's a whole nother realm of resources out there. If I can help you by connecting you to a resource, then I've I've been a good supporter to you. And if you're one of those professionals that has the resources, make sure you don't just say seek help or there are resources, but you give real tangible ways to connect to those resources. The one thing we know is that when you're in the midst of a grief experience and process and journey, you don't have the wherewithal to dig deep or to pay attention to details. So the easier we can make this for each other, then the more likely it is to be utilized and therefore be effective. So reach out, reach in, reach across, whatever it means, but this should never be a lonely journey. And I know it may feel lonely to those that are experiencing it because perhaps the circle of support has changed, the trust circle has changed, but there are still others that are ready and willing and more than capable of supporting. The other thing I would say is that we know that when you model healthy coping skills and mechanisms, it's important for the children and the other family members that are in your life, the others in your life, whether they're family or not. So one of the people in our field that I so respect is Erwin Sandler, and his research in Arizona at Child Mind Institute says that what we know is that healthy grieving parents, caregivers, raise healthy grieving children and teens. So what that means is you model what good grief coping looks like. It doesn't mean you hide it. It doesn't mean you try to bury your emotions. A lot of times people will ask, do we cry in front of the children? And the answer is, if you need to cry, yes, it's okay to cry in front of the children. Is it okay to lose it in front of the children? Maybe not. So if we talk about that a little bit, it helps to model when you're crying to say, I'm crying because I'm sad, mad, lonely, upset, whatever, because this happened. And I would leave it generally. You don't have to give the specifics. I just acknowledging that I'm sad because I experienced this, and that's enough. Or I'm mad because I've experienced this. When you're mad, there's a lot of anger in this situation. I can only imagine how many different levels and layers of anger there are. And so it's important to acknowledge that anger is okay. It is definitely a part of this story that we're telling, but it's what we do with the anger that is so important. So with kids, we simplify it by saying anger often equates to energy. And the idea, going back to our definition of grief, is to get rid of the energy, get to release the inside and let it out. And that's through energy. So for instance, if one of your coping mechanisms is to run, to exercise, to walk, anything that causes you to move, then I would say to those around me, I'm angry, so therefore I'm going for a walk. I'm going to go for a run. Giving the rationale, this is why I do this. It's okay that I feel this, but this is how I'm handling it. And that's how we model, good coping strategies. It's not just do it, but explain it along the way and let others understand why. You know what? I need to just be alone right now. I need to go. This is overwhelming for me. I'm feeling very overwhelmed. So if you'll just give me a minute, I want to go be alone, and then I'll come back and enter into the conversation, whatever. It's very important that we do that. Now, does that mean we display all of our emotions and all of our coping mechanisms in front of children or others? No, not necessarily. Sometimes it's too much for others. So we need to just go do what we need to do. And, if you really can't hold it together in front of a child, then you shouldn't be in front of the child. Allow yourself that time to go in the shower and cry, or whatever it is that you need to do. If your coping mechanisms are not child appropriate, then certainly don't display those in front of children. But when you have those strong, good coping mechanisms, it also helps you realize the need to do it and why you're doing it, and that the result you're hoping for. So by verbalizing the rationale, you're really strengthening your own coping mechanisms as well. So The other thing I would just say is that as at NACG, one of the things we do, we have a book actually that is full of activities that families can do together. So it's important that this isn't several individual journeys, that you also find ways to intersect the story and the journey. And so that means bring the family together, and whether that's in conversation at mealtime, whether that's in an activity you do together, you create a memory box, you do a grief capsule, you make a menu and a placemat that honors that person, that you talk about them, you put photos out. Each family can find other things that are appropriate for you, but it's real important that you come together as a family. The topic of this symposium is family support. And so we need to make sure that we offer opportunities to invite all the family, define family however you want to, all those that are in that circle together to support each other and go through the journey together. I know that a lot of the information I gave is very general. I hope that it rang some bells and helped each of you in your own way, and would love to know if there are no open questions, I guess. If there are any questions, I'd be glad to show you a couple of the activities in here that we have found useful. One of them is to create a grief capsule. So just putting a box with mementos from that person in the child into a special box, and then put the box in a special place that can be pulled out and looked at or viewed, or anything that's tangible is really helpful for all of us, not just kids. Another is to create a family journal. And what that really could look like is that I write in the journal, and I'll leave the journal somewhere in my house, and then someone else can come and write in the journal, replying to me or building on me or questioning me, and it's a back and forth. And the blessing of this is that it allows conversations to happen that sometimes people might not have enough nerve to happen in person. It's hard to bring it up, but I can go over to myself and write it, and you can respond to it. So it allows a lot of opportunity for conversations that might otherwise be difficult to bring up. If you have any specific needs about anything I've said today, please feel free to reach out at nacg.org. The resource I mentioned is there. But we also have, this happens to be a book, but some of those same activities are on a free and downloadable resource on our website. There's also different resources that might be helpful on how it relates to the work we do. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. Thank you, Danielle, and thank you for the work that you're doing with your organization.